Hello friends, and welcome to today's Sutta class. As usual, we will start with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So welcome everyone to today's Sutta class. Today we have a topic that might be a little bit challenging for some people because we are talking about overcoming sensual desire, and that involves some meditations that are a bit challenging. So in the last few weeks, we have been talking about the 5 hindrances, how to overcome the 5 hindrances. And right now we are going through each hindrance individually and looking into a lot of detail what kind of meditation practices we can do to work with that specific hindrance. And so last time we have looked at ill will and anger and the countermeasures that we take for that, which is Brahmavihara practice and especially metta practice, the practice of loving kindness. So last time we have looked in a lot of detail in all the various different methods that are associated with metta practice, the suttas that the Buddha suggested and the methods that the Buddha suggested, and also a few later practices we have mentioned. So that was how to deal with ill will. And so today we are moving on to another hindrance. Today we are talking about sensual desire. And so if you remember from 2 weeks ago, when we had a sutta that gave an overview over working with all the 5 hindrances, that sutta suggested that if we want to overcome sensual desire, we have to meditate on what it called the sign of the repulsive or the sign of foulness. So as you can imagine, those kind of meditation practices are somewhat unpleasant for some people. Other people find it very enjoyable to work with these because you can get a lot of joy if you manage to detach from sensual pleasure and become peaceful and calm inside. So this is what we are going to look at today. And so when we have a lot of sensual desire, or this is a hindrance that is present in our mind, then obviously our mind is very much enthralled with sensual objects. We're very attached to external things or even external people. We can be, obviously we can be attached to external objects. We can also be attached to people, our family members, our friends, our partner, and so on. And so it can be a little bit difficult to work with that because we have to, because obviously attachment can be somewhat pleasurable. We can get a lot of joy out of these external objects. So working with that is a little bit challenging for a few people. But obviously all this kind of attachment is the cause of craving. This leads to a lot of suffering in the future. This also leads to us being stuck in samsara and being trapped forever in this wheel of rebirth. So in order to, develop our meditation practice, we really have to come into a balance where the mind isn't constantly attracted to external objects. So this is why this hindrance is so strong and why this is something we need to work with. And so there are obviously different methods how to do that. The suttas mainly focus on working with our own body. And the reason why the suttas suggest that we work with our own body instead of working with any other kind of object is that the most attachment that we have is to our own body. So we can have attachment to external things. We can have attachment also to other people. But with external things and with other people, we usually recognize there's attachment, and we usually do think they are mine. For example, let's say a mobile phone, we can think this is my phone. Or if it is a person, this is my partner, this is my child, these are my parents. So we kind of make them mine or make them ours, but we still understand that somehow they don't really fully belong to us. Like a phone can break or we can lose it, or our partner might break up with us or leave us, our parents might disown us, or we might quarrel with them, or something might happen to them. So we understand that kind of they're still external to us. But with our body, it's somewhat different. With our body, we really identify very, very strongly. And our body is with us the whole time for our entire life. As long as the body lives and as long as the body is viable and it doesn't die, we're just stuck with this body. So this is like the one object that we are by far the most attached to, and that we by far we consider the most as ours, as mine. So what we turn into like a personal possession, basically. So because this is the strongest object, it is the most efficient if we directly work with this, because this attacks sensual desire or greed right at the root. So if we can break this kind of attachment, we have broken basically any kind of attachment to the sensual realm. So that's why the suttas focus a lot on body contemplations, and why this is the main method that the sutta suggests for working with sensual desire. And so when we talk about practicing with the sign of foulness or the sign of the repulsive, that can sound a little bit challenging, and because it seems like we are developing disgust, and disgust seems like not a very healthy mind state. It seems like we are developing ill will. But what we have to understand when we practice this is we're not really developing ill will. If it leads to us developing ill will or real disgust, then we are doing something wrong. What we're trying to do is just detach from the object, because right now we perceive the object as really very pleasurable, very desirable. We are very much attracted to the thing. So what we're trying to do is come to the middle, where we can let go of the object without feeling repulsed by the object. So if we are feeling repulsed by the object, if we feel that it's really disgusting, if we start hating our own body, for example, or hating the external object, or hating the person that we're practicing with, then we have gone too far. So what we're trying to do is come to the middle. So it's called the sign of the repulsive. But if we actually feel disgust, then we have taken the practice too far. We're trying to come to a balance in the middle where we can feel peaceful, where we feel neither attraction nor repulsion. And one interesting thing also about these body contemplation methods is that nowadays they're not practiced that much, because, as I mentioned, it's a little bit challenging. We have to really look into all the unattractive parts of our body, and we have to and because we're working with unattractive parts, it can be very challenging. Our mind doesn't really want to look at this. Our mind wants to look at beautiful things. It doesn't want to look at unbeautiful things. So it's not a meditation method that people like to practice that much nowadays. But it's very interesting that historically, this has been a method that people have used a lot. For example, in the Thai forest tradition, historically, this has been a method that has been taught over and over again in very much detail, and has been encouraged very much by some of the older Thai ajahns and all these highly accomplished people and teachers who, well, tradition says they were arahants, so they were very highly developed. Many of them use this as their main method to overcome attachment to the sensual realm, especially up until anagamiship. Many teachers recommended this as the main method. So this has been a very powerful method for many people who got very, very far on the path. And at least for that reason, I think it's very important that we look at this and that we are kind of familiar with this method. Even if it doesn't become our main meditation method, still it's quite important that we have a working knowledge of how this works. And especially if we find a lot of sensual desire in our mind, then we can apply this method. Just try it out. So to have a look at these methods, I think it would be best to have a look at a part of the Satipatthana Sutta. This is Majjhima Nikaya number 10. In the Satipatthana Sutta, there are a lot of different methods described, and a few of them deal with this perception of the repulsive or perception of foulness in the body. And so I think for today, we're going to have a look at that part of the Satipatthana Sutta. So I have put a link in the live chat. The link is to Bhante Suchato's translation. I will also be reading from Bhante Suchato's translation. So if you click on the link, that should take you to paragraph 1.4, which has the title Focusing on the Repulsive. And we will start from there. So before this paragraph, there were already a number of other meditation methods, which we're going to skip. For that reason, the text continues basically in the middle of a list of meditation methods. And so the Buddha says the following. Furthermore, a mendicant examines their own body, up from the soles of the feet and down from the tips of the hairs, wrapped in skin and full of many kinds of filth. In this body, there is head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, undigested food, feces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, saliva, snot, synovial fluid, and urine. It's as if there were a bag with openings at both ends, filled with various kinds of grains, such as fine rice, wheat, mung beans, peas, sesame, and ordinary rice. And someone with good eyesight were to open it and examine the contents. These grains are fine rice, these are wheat, these are mung beans, these are peas, these are sesame, and these are ordinary rice. So this is the first meditation method, and if by just reading through the list you already felt a little bit queasy, then that's maybe a sign that you have some attachment there. So the Buddha says you examine your own body, your entire body, anything below the hair and above the soles, so basically the entire body, and the body is wrapped in skin. So on the outside, there's obviously skin, but we are also looking at everything that is inside. And so what the Buddha suggests is that we go through these 31 parts of the body in our meditation, and we take, the way this is usually done is, hopefully, if you can, try to memorize this list. If you cannot memorize the list, then just focus on 2 or 3 in each session and memorize those 2 or 3. And so, for example, you start with the hair of the head and you contemplate the hair of the head. And usually people are quite attracted to hair. It can look very attractive. People spend a lot of time making the hair beautiful. They wash it and they style it and they buy a lot of products and they go to the hairdresser to make it look nice. It takes a lot of time to make it look beautiful. And people can be very attracted to the hair. But when we do this kind of meditation, then we also contemplate on all the negative aspects of head hair. So, for example, it gets dirty, it gets greasy and oily, it gets smelly, you have to wash it all the time. It's quite annoying, which is why monastics don't have hair, because you don't really need it and it's just an annoyance. And so you reflect on all the negative aspects of hair. Actually, it's just keratin fibers. And for some reason, people are really, really attracted to this random fibers. So there's nothing actually beautiful there. It's just people like to waste a lot of time on styling their hair. They like to waste a lot of money on all the products and the hairdresser. And people get very invested in how they look. If they have a bad hair day, they get really, really upset. If they style themselves and a wind comes, the hair gets messed up again and they get upset. So people, like the hair can lead to a lot of suffering actually. So in that way, we reflect on the hair and we think it's really not that beautiful. If one falls out and it falls into the food, you feel really disgusted. Like you're eating in a restaurant and there's a hair in your food, you feel really disgusted. If it turns gray because you're aging, you get really upset. So you reflect on all the negative parts of hair. Then you can move on to body hair. Body hair, you can do similar reflections. Whatever, body hair, for example, is very annoying. You have to shave it off all the time. If you're a man and you have to shave your beard, if you're a woman and you have to shave whatever, your legs or your armpits. So body hair is also quite annoying, and so on. You can go through the entire list and you focus on all the drawbacks of that particular body part. So maybe you have noticed the first 5 of these body parts are things that we can see on the outside. So head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, and skin. This is something we can actually see. So we can reflect, let's say, on the nails. Nails, the same thing. We like to put nail polish on them, especially if we're women. We like to spend a lot of time. We have to cut them. We have to file them into a nice shape so that they don't splinter and become uncomfortable. So again, nails need a lot of attention. They need a lot of time. We think they're beautiful, but actually they're not that beautiful. Again, it's just, I think it's also keratin. So again, it's just a random substance. Nothing all that beautiful. They get dirty underneath, so you have to clean them all the time. Again, if you cut off a piece of your nail, if you clip your nail off and a clipping falls into your food, you think that's really disgusting. If you find a nail clipping in your food, I think most people would find that quite disgusting, and so on. So again, you're reflecting on the drawbacks of each part of the body. With the teeth, the same. People think they look beautiful if they're even, but if they're uneven, it's not that attractive. And if they get holes, then they become very painful and you have to go to the dentist. Most people don't like to go to the dentist, and so on. Kind of you reflect with each and every part of the body, and then you reflect with the inside parts as well, all the organs, all the liquids, and so on and so on. So basically, this is how you do it. As you can see, it's not really, you don't have to feel really disgusted, but you just reflect on all the drawbacks so that you can break the attachment that you have to the body. And interestingly, this is, as I mentioned before, this is a very, very important meditation subject, this reflection on the body. It is so important, actually, that this has become part of the ordination ceremony for the novice ordination, so for the samanera or samaneri ordination. And as part of that ordination, the new member of the Sangha gets a meditation subject by the teacher, by the person who is carrying out the ordination. And the subject that they get is exactly this kind of body contemplation. So it's interesting because this is the only meditation subject that is mentioned in the ordination ceremony. The ordination ceremony doesn't even mention about breath meditation, for example, which is a really very popular form of meditation, but it only mentions this one, and that shows how important this meditation method actually is. So yeah, it's a very interesting method to experiment with. And then we also have the simile here, and the simile again explains a little bit more how we should understand this method. And the simile says it's as though we had a bag, and the bag had 2 openings. So again, obviously the bag represents our body with 2 openings, the mouth and the anus, where the food goes through the body. One opening on the top, one opening at the bottom. And then there are all sorts of grains in this body, or in this bag, just as our body has all kinds of organs and liquids and so on. And in that bag of grains, there are all the various kinds of grains, rice and wheat and beans and peas and sesame and so on. And then you open up the bag and you just look at the different contents and you see, this is a sesame seed, this is a bean, this is a grain of rice, and so on. So if you open up such a bag, you wouldn't really feel like disgusted. You would just be very neutral. You wouldn't really have any kind of emotional reaction. You wouldn't find it particularly attractive, but you also wouldn't find it particularly unattractive. It's just like there. And that's kind of the kind of relationship we should develop with our body, the kind of emotional attitude we should have towards our body. Not particularly attracted, but also not particularly repulsed. So kind of that we have to be clear about that, so that we don't take the meditation too far and start hating our body or start feeling really disgusted by our body. So for that reason, this simile is kind of important and kind of illustrates again how what kind of attitude we should have when we practice this kind of meditation. And so then the Buddha goes on and he repeats a paragraph that he repeats basically for all of the methods that he introduces here. So here it has been a bit abbreviated, but we can go back to before and see what the Buddha says here. And so the Buddha actually says, and so they meditate observing an aspect of the body internally, externally, and both internally and externally. They meditate observing the body as liable to originate, as liable to vanish, and as liable to both originate and vanish. All mindfulness is established that the body exists, to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness. They meditate independent, not grasping at anything in the world. That's how a mendicant meditates, by observing an aspect of the body. So here the Buddha describes the attitude that we should have during this meditation. So we observe this aspect of the body internally, which means we kind of focus on our own body. We realize our own body is this way, our own hair, our own skin, our own whatever organs are this way. And externally means other people's bodies are also the same. And both internally and externally means both for us and for others. Every body is the same. And then we observe that the body is liable to originate and to vanish, which means that we look at impermanence. We see the body constantly changes. So over a long period of time, we can see how the body ages, and eventually it will die, it will like break down and die. But even from the day to day, we can see how, for example, the body processes food. The food changes as it moves through the body. So the body needs energy every day. And we just know hair falls out every day and grows again, and our nails grow again. And also on the, let's say, cellular level, on the molecular level, molecules are processed the whole time. Cells are also dying and being regrown and being replaced the whole time. So our body is just in a constant flux. There's not one stable entity that is our body. So it is important to, again, see that the body isn't a fixed thing. It's also subject to impermanence, just as anything else. And then the Buddha says, mindfulness is established that the body exists to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness. So this is important to understand properly. When the Buddha says the body exists, he doesn't mean that the body exists in an absolute way, forever unchanging. Because like literally the sentence before, he just said, you observe the impermanence, you observe how the body like originates and vanishes. So what the Buddha means is that we focus on the mindfulness that the body is here now in this moment. So we focus on this moment, on the meditation object, which is the body. So our mindfulness is established on the body. The mindfulness doesn't just randomly wander around and wildly think about other things. And that's important because this meditation method is like a little bit, it's very active. Like the mind has to think about all the drawbacks and all the various different parts of the body. So the mind is kind of moving around a bit. But still, mindfulness needs to be focused broadly on this subject of the body. Like you still have to focus on the object. You can't just randomly start thinking about whatever your next holiday or your plans for tomorrow or what you did like 3 days ago. Still, your mindfulness, even though in this meditation method it's allowed to move around, still it has to be focused on the body, broadly speaking, to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness. So the mindfulness doesn't have to be totally narrowed down and focused. It has to wander a little bit. It has to contemplate all the various different drawbacks and so on, and the various different parts of the body. But still, you need to be focused enough so that knowledge can develop and wisdom can develop, and you can see the impermanence and you can kind of start to detach from your attachment to the body. So that's basically what this sentence is about. And then the Buddha says, when you do this, then you meditate independent, not grasping at anything in the world. So that is the end goal. You become independent. You're able to let go of the sensual desire, the attachment to the body. You become independent. You're basically in balance in the middle, in this peaceful state where you don't cling to the body or to any other external object. And you're not grasping at anything in the world. Through this contemplation, you really learn to let go any kind of attachment to any kind of object. So that is basically the end goal of this meditation. It's not to develop repulsiveness, it is to be able to detach and let go. So this is one meditation method, how we can do body contemplations by focusing on the repulsive. And then the Buddha introduces another method. And the Buddha says, furthermore, a mendicant examines their own body, whatever its placement or posture, according to the elements. In this body, there is the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the air element. It's as if an expert butcher or butcher's apprentice were to kill a cow and sit down at the crossroads with the meat cut into portions. So now here we have a meditation method where we focus on the elements. So again, we are dividing the body into different parts so we can investigate all the individual parts and for each part see the drawbacks. So we can start to detach from the body. But this time we divide it into different parts. So we divide it according to the elements. So when we talk about the element meditation, we've talked about this a little bit in the past already, so hopefully you can remember. Obviously, we don't think that there's actual earth in our body, like literal dirt or something, and we don't think there's literal fire in our body. So this refers to just to the to the state that the matter in our body is in. So the matter in our body can either be solid, or it can be liquid, or it can be in the form of gas. And so that corresponds to the earth element, to the water element, and to the wind element. So anything that is earth element is anything that is solid in our body. Anything that is water element are all the liquids in our body. Anything that is wind element are all the gases in our body. And then the fire element is all the energy that happens in our body, energy transformations, when, let's say, we produce body heat, when we digest food, when things transform from one state to the other, when on the cellular levels we have certain chemical reactions where molecules change from one state to the other, for example. So all this produces energy or uses energy, all this uses energy, produces heat, and that is the fire element. So, for example, when we contemplate earth element, we will think about all the solid parts of our body. That would be, let's say, our hair, our skin, our bones, most of our organs, probably. All this we would contemplate when we contemplate about earth element. And again, we would see all the drawbacks in that, and we contemplate in a similar way to before. And then when we talk about water element, or we contemplate water element, then we would think about all the fluids in our body. We would think about, let's say, the blood, the tears, urine, saliva, all the various different fluids that we have in our body, and we would contemplate all of them. And when we talk about the wind element, for example, we would contemplate breathing, in-breath and out-breath, or the various gases that are produced during the digestive process. So we could contemplate these kind of things. And fire element I have just explained. So in this way, again, we split the body into different parts, and then we contemplate each part individually. And the Buddha has also used the simile here. He says it's as if there was a butcher, and the butcher cuts open a cow and displays all the various different parts at the crossroads. So in the same way, we basically dissect our own body and take apart all the different parts, and then each part individually we can contemplate. And then again, there is the same passage that we have gone through before. So again, you meditate, observing an aspect of the body internally, externally, and both internally and externally. So you contemplate that this is true for your own body, for other people's bodies, and you see the impermanence in the body, how things vanish, and also how things originate. And again, your mindfulness is established on the body, and if you practice this properly, then you're able to dwell independent and to not cling to anything in the world. You're completely detached. You completely overcome all sensual desire to your body. And then finally, the last method that I want to go through today is the charnel ground contemplations. And so the charnel ground contemplations can be a little bit challenging for a few people because this involves the contemplation of death. So as you can see, there's also kind of a progression in difficulty in these methods. So the first method just involves looking at the body just like you look at a bag of grains. So you wouldn't really feel all that disgusted usually. That's just a fairly mild method looking at your body. But when you come to the charnel ground meditations, some people might find that very challenging. However, if you find it very challenging, that shows that you have quite a bit of attachment to your body. So actually, that's a method that might be quite helpful for you, at least to experiment with from time to time and see why you have such strong reactions to think about this kind of issues. Anyway, it's a useful method to just know about, even if you don't want to practice it yourself. So let's see what the Buddha says. Furthermore, suppose a mendicant were to see a corpse thrown in a charnel ground, and it had been dead for 1, 2, or 3 days, bloated, livid, and festering. They'd compare it with their own body. This body is also of that same nature, that same kind, and cannot go beyond that. That too is how a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body. Furthermore, suppose they were to see a corpse thrown in a charnel ground being devoured by crows, hawks, vultures, herons, dogs, tigers, leopards, jackals, and many kinds of little creatures. That compared with their own body. This body is also of that same nature, that same kind, and cannot go beyond that. That too is how a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of the body. Furthermore, suppose they were to see a corpse thrown in a charnel ground, a skeleton with flesh and blood held together by sinews. Or then the next step, a skeleton without flesh but smeared with blood and held together by sinews. And then the next step, a skeleton rid of flesh and blood held together by sinews. Bones rid of sinews, scattered in every direction, here a hand bone, there a foot bone, there a shin bone, there a thigh bone, there a hip bone, there a rib bone, here a backbone, there an arm bone, here a neck bone, there a jawbone, here a tooth, there the skull. Or the next step, white bones, the color of shells, and then decrepit bones heaped in a pile, then bones rotted and crumbled to powder. That compared with their own body, this body is also of that same nature, that same kind, and cannot go beyond that. So this is the charnel ground contemplation. So I think most of you will be familiar with the idea of charnel grounds in the Buddha's time. So in the Buddha's time, most of the corpses were not buried and they were also not burnt or cremated. They were actually just taken outside of the village or taken outside of the town, and there would be a designated spot somewhere in the wilderness, in the forest, where people just deposit the corpses and leave them lying there in the open air to decompose according to the natural process, and also usually they would be eaten by animals. And so basically the corpse were just lying there in the open, and anybody could go there and see this process. So in the Buddha's time, it was fairly easy to see corpses, and most people would have seen corpses in the various stages of decay at some point in their life. It's not like today where most of us either have never even seen a corpse, or if we have seen a corpse, it would have been beautified and treated with various chemicals, and they would put on makeup, and they would make their hair nice, so that when you see basically that dead person, it will look exactly as if they were living. Like you wouldn't see any kind of sign that the body was decomposing. Anyway, for some people have never even seen a corpse, because often the coffins are just closed when we have a funeral. But even if the coffin is open, usually we don't see any sign of decomposition. And so in modern times, we take a lot of effort not to show people that process of how a dead body decomposes. But in the Buddha's time, that would have been very easy to see, even for lay people, but especially for monastics. Monastics would quite frequently go to those charnel grounds and stay there and contemplate on all these various stages of decay. And so here the Buddha introduces a method with various stages, I think 9 or 10 stages, I think 9 stages, I didn't really count. And so as you meditate, you would visualize or imagine, if you cannot visualize, just imagine a corpse, and then imagine your own body to be like this. So imagine your own body decomposing in this way, because eventually your own body will decompose in this way. When you're dead, this is what is going to happen to your body. So again, this is a method to see the impermanence of the body and to break our attachment to the body. And so you start with a corpse that is freshly dead. It becomes bloated, it changes color, it starts to fester. And then you realize my own body is also going to do that at some point in the future when I am dead. And then you go to the next step, where you have the corpse being devoured by various kinds of animals. So animals that feed on carcasses, like vultures, jackals, dogs, and so on, and especially many kinds of little creatures. So such a body, especially in a tropical country, would be quite quickly full of insects and worms and maggots and so on. And you realize this is also exactly what is going to happen to my own body. And then you go through it step by step, as the text here suggests. Eventually, all the internal organs and all the big muscles will have been eaten up by those animals, because this is obviously the most delicious part of your body, the most digestible part of your body. And so what remains is a skeleton with flesh and blood held together by sinews. So like little bits and bobs of flesh will be left here and there that hasn't been gnawed off yet by the animals. So that would be the next step. After that, the next step is all the flesh has been nibbled off, but blood still remains there and is still held together by sinews. So the skeleton is still relatively intact. Next step is now even the blood has been removed. Either, like if this was a naturally occurring situation, then probably the rains would have washed it off, or animals would have licked it off, because blood is still quite delicious. But it's still a full skeleton held together by sinews. And then the next thing is that the sinews also break down, because they're softer than the bones, so they would break down first. And then at that point, the bones are just scattered everywhere, because there's nothing that's holding them together anymore. So as the text says, there's a rib bone here and the skull there, and a hand bone somewhere else. And then the next thing is the bones also change color. They become the color of shells. The next thing is the bones start to break down. As it says here, they're decrepit and they're somehow heaped in a pile. So it's just a pile of bones. You can't even really tell anymore which kind of bone that was originally. It's just like some bits and pieces of bones. And then the next step is that the bones, even the bones are rotting and they're turning into powder. And once they're just, your body has been turned into a pile of powder, that would just be scattered by the wind, and there would be nothing left of your body. And then you reflect, exactly this will happen to my body. So you don't just randomly visualize some neutral body, but you really make it personal. You really reflect on your own body, because your own body is the thing that you're attached to. And then again, there is the same standard passage where the Buddha says you observe this internally and externally, and you perceive the impermanence of this whole body being created and breaking apart again. And eventually, again, the end goal, just as in any of these meditations, is that you are able to be independent and to not grasp at anything in the world, so that you're able to really fully let go of all attachment to the body. And if you do that perfectly, to the full extent, then this is what enables you to really overcome all attachment to the sensual realm. And if you can do that perfectly, then that will be your breakthrough to anagamiship, to non-return, because you have completely overcome the sensual realm, so you will not return to the sensual realm anymore. That is the sign of non-return. And that is also why, as I mentioned in the beginning, the Ajahns in Thailand of the old forest tradition place so much emphasis on this kind of meditation, because this can take you so far in your practice. So these are the meditation methods that I wanted to go through today. We have mainly focused on practicing with the body because, as I mentioned, the body is the one object that we are most attached to. Of course, if you feel specific sensual desire for another object, you can use other methods too. For example, if you feel very attached to flavors and nice food, you can practice with food. There is also a meditation in the suttas elsewhere that is called the recollection of the repulsiveness of food, for example. So if you were to practice with that, for example, you could imagine the digestive process. So food smells nice and looks nice when it's on your plate. Once you've eaten it, it doesn't really, it's not really that attractive anymore. So if you get sick and you vomit it up again, you have no desire to eat it again, even though it is exactly the same food, more or less. Or if it's been processed by your body and comes out on the toilet, you again have no desire to eat that again, even though fundamentally the matter in the food hasn't really changed. So in that way, we can do reflections on repulsiveness of food if you're very attracted to food. We can also, if you're very attracted to another object, we can practice this with any kind of object or any kind of person. For example, if you're very attracted to your phone, you can reflect on all the drawbacks of your phone, how it takes a lot of time, how it can easily break, can easily get lost. You might get robbed. It might attract criminals. It takes up a lot of time that you might otherwise spend on something more useful. It encourages your friends to just talk to you through the phone instead of meeting face to face and spending quality time together. So, with any kind of object, you can practice seeing all the drawbacks. So you can practice the repulsiveness of your phone, for example, as a meditation, or with whatever you are attached to. So hopefully these meditation methods or this sutta class today was useful for you in some way. And now I see that quite a few people have already left some comments in the comment section. So if you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments and I will see if I can answer some of them. So a lot of people are saying hello. Nice to see so many of you. Wonderful. And Gita is here. Oh, it's nice that Gita has time to check in again and to be with us this morning. So she says, Aya, is there not a sutta where several of the Sangha doing this body contemplation, they took their own lives, died due to the repulsion of the body. Then after the Buddha returned from retreat, and Venerable Ananda told him what happened, and then having understood, advised Sangha to do practice of breath meditation. Yeah, so there is a sutta. Actually, this is in the Vinaya. There's not a sutta. This is in the Vinaya. And yes, this happened. The Buddha instructed the monks and nuns to do this contemplation, and then it went wrong because people didn't really understand how to practice this properly, and they took it too far. As I mentioned in the beginning, this meditation method is for breaking sensual desire. So if this is for people who are experiencing a lot of sensual desire. If you're experiencing a lot of ill will, then this method is not for you because it just doesn't work for ill will. If you have ill will, then what you need to practice is Brahmaviharas, especially metta practice, loving kindness practice. This method here is specifically for sensual desire. So if you notice that you have ill will in your mind, either before or during or after you practice this meditation, then obviously this is not the right time to practice this meditation. So if you notice that while you're doing this meditation, you start hating your body, you start having suicidal thoughts or any kind of these issues, obviously you're not moving in the right direction, and obviously this is not the right time to practice this meditation method. What it should lead to, as I mentioned, is it should lead to peace, it should lead to detachment, and it should lead to you dwelling independent from anything in the world. So it should lead to a state where you're detached and peaceful and happy. Ideally, for example, some kind of jhana state. If you feel worse after you've done the meditation, if you have developed ill will or actual disgust, then the meditation, like you haven't done the meditation properly, or the method is just not the right method for you. So if this meditation method leads to suicidal thoughts, don't do it. Use another method. But if you have a lot of sensual desire in your mind, then this method can be very, very helpful. So you have to kind of evaluate your own mind and see what kind of hindrances are there. And this is also why we are talking about all the different hindrances, like now in the next few weeks and over the course of the last few weeks also, so that you can see which hindrance is in your mind and which method to use for that. Because you can't use every method for every hindrance. You have to use the specific method for that particular hindrance. Otherwise, things can go wrong. And again, this is why you should be with a qualified teacher from time to time. If you have any questions, you should ask the teacher and see if you're doing things right. And in this particular case, things went wrong because, as you mentioned, the Buddha went on retreat. The Buddha wasn't available for 2 weeks. And so the monks did very intensive practice for 2 weeks and things went wrong. And then there was one monk, according to the story, who went around and who offered to kill people. And then people thought, oh, this is actually a good idea, which it isn't. Like, suicide is not a good option, no matter what some people tell you or what you feel. If you're not feeling well, then use another method. So let's see. Luciano says, there is a series of paintings made in Japanese Buddhist context depicting the decaying body. Yeah, so this is very common in many, many cultures. Also, for example, in Sri Lanka, I have lived in Sri Lanka for 2.5 years until last year. And in Sri Lanka, almost every temple that I visited had a huge painting or a huge poster of the various stages of decay of the body in their main hall. So everybody could see it all the time if they wanted to. So this is very common as a painting or a poster or something on the wall of temples in many forms of Buddhism, actually. So Buddha Ruchi says, Aya, 2 weeks ago, I went into the home of a friend, having not received answers to texts and emails and phone calls, and found her body in her bed. Impermanence is our nature. Death is inherent in birth. May all beings be happy. Okay. Well, I'm very sorry to hear about your friend. And I imagine it might have been quite a difficult time, and for you to be the person to find her body probably must have been quite challenging. So I'm glad that you were able to use this for your practice, as it seems that you were able to do reflections on impermanence. And thank you very much for sharing the story. This is indeed our nature, and death can come at any time. And for that reason, it is good to be prepared by reflecting on death from time to time, so that when death actually comes, then we are not that much attached to our own bodies anymore, and we are easily able to let go and move on to whatever our next destination will be, unless obviously we are arahants, in which case we just parinibbana. Then Anonymous has a question. Greetings. When one is in training, what is mandatory to learn before bhikkhuni ordination? Also, what is allowable for monastics to eat and drink after noontime? Okay, so this obviously is a question that is quite off topic for today. So I'll just answer this very briefly. What is mandatory to learn before bhikkhuni ordination? It depends very much on the community and the preceptor that you're training with. So ideally, obviously, if you want to take ordination, you should live with a community for a few years, go through their whole training process, and then the teachers, the local teachers and the local community will guide you in what you need to learn. And that can be different from place to place. What is allowable for monastics to eat and drink after noon? Again, that can vary from place to place. The Vinaya says that there are 5 tonics that you can take, which are ghee, butter, honey, oil, and sugar or molasses. And then combinations of those. And there are also some medicinal products that you can use in the afternoon, herbal medicines, for example, and also modern medicines. So it depends a little bit from community to community exactly what they will allow. Often juice drinks will be allowed. And of course, coffee and tea and things like that will usually be allowed. And then another question is there from Anthony. And Anthony says, are there any guided meditations on death that you recommend? I have done Bantanalios guided Maranasati, which is very good, but it is meant to be practiced in the laying or corpse posture. Okay, so I have done Ajahn Brahmali's meditations a few times. His death meditations are quite different from what we have done today. In his death meditations, you just imagine that you are in a quiet room all by yourself, and it is the last hour of your life. And you just imagine going through that death process, what you would be thinking, and how you would make that transition as peaceful and calm as possible. So that can also be quite impactful, but also it's very, very gentle. So for people who have a little bit trouble with the idea of contemplating death, this is a very gentle introduction to death meditation. So that would be Ajahn Brahmali's method. You can Google it and probably you can find it on the internet. I know there are several YouTubes of his method. And Buddharuchi says, we are fragile, we are temporary bits of stuff and thoughts. Death follows us, meditation on death, I always find peaceful and satisfying. I'm really glad to hear that. So it seems that your practice is making good progress. You are able to come to terms with your own mortality, and you are able to find peace in that knowledge. So that is a very, very important step. In the beginning, many people find it very challenging to think about death. It causes a lot of anxiety. But if you're able to overcome that and find peace in that process and in that thought, then obviously our practice has made a big step forward, because we have been able to let go of a lot of attachment to our life and to our body already. So I think that is a very good way how you're practicing. And then Jay Kala says, Aya, do you have a recommendation for sensual pleasures that aren't sexual, like wanting to have sweets, wanting to eat after noon, wanting to use entertainment, etc.? So basically, we can use exactly the same methods with any kind of attachment to sensual pleasures. So, for example, as I mentioned, with food, such as sweets or wanting to eat after noon, this is also about food. We can do the repulsiveness of food contemplations. We contemplate how the food changes as it passes through our body. The way it looks if it comes out again, or if it has passed through the body. And also seeing that, like actively contemplating the drawbacks, like sweets will be very unhealthy. It can lead to all kinds of health problems. Your teeth can decay. Your body might develop diabetes or whatever. So just contemplating all the drawbacks and being very mindful around these kind of cravings can be really helpful. Wanting to use entertainment, again, contemplating the drawbacks, seeing how it would make your mind very agitated, how it would lead your mind away from peace and from stillness, how it would put a lot of new ideas into your mind, so your mind gets very restless, and it's much more difficult later to meditate or to focus on your meditation object. So clearly understanding why we are not engaging in these things can be very helpful. So it's not just we are denying ourselves to harm ourselves or to be like aesthetic or to whatever, be like the most austere kind of person on the planet, but all of this actually has a purpose, and all of this is actually very supportive for our practice. So if you clearly understand what the purpose is of not engaging in entertainments or not listening to music or not eating sweets, then it's much easier not to do it, because we can see there is a reason why we are not engaging in all these kind of things. Then Buddha Ruchi says, I can also see where these meditations on the body can lead to fear. Can you recommend antidotal practice for fear? So yeah, fear is kind of a tricky emotion to deal with. Fear is very, very closely linked to our sense of self. So fear is really to protect this idea of an I or a self. So fear is very, very deeply rooted. Fear, like to uproot fear, you have to go very deep inside and uproot a lot of attachments to your own self, or to this notion of a self that doesn't really exist. So with fear, usually it's quite helpful to ask, why am I fearful? At least that works for me quite well. So why am I fearful? And then sort of try to see that there's nothing to be fearful about. So let's say we are fearful of the body dying, but if we understand the body is impermanent anyway, and we can't change it, then it's much better to actually relax and to let the process naturally evolve. Because we can't, even if we have fear, there's nothing we can do about it. So the body is going to break up and die anyway. Whether we have fear or not, the body is going to die. But if we have fear, then we are suffering even now when there's no need to suffer. If we don't have fear, then we can be happy now, and we can be relaxed and peaceful now. So obviously, it's much preferable to be able to let go of fear. So clearly understanding that it is fear that is making us suffer in that moment unnecessarily, and understanding that if we can let go of that fear, then that will lead to peace and happiness, is a way of dissolving this fear. But yeah, fear is something I think that takes time to dissolve. So being very patient with us also, and not doing too much. Like if we have a very, very strong reaction when we are doing death meditation, then going a little bit slower, being a little bit more gentle, using maybe a different method of meditation. That's why I have introduced different methods today. For example, we can use the first method that we talked about, where we just observe the different parts of the body, like bags of beans, like beans in a bag. Might be better than forcing oneself to do death meditation if it really causes a lot of anxiety. So Anthony says he likes doing Brahmaviharas when I experience fear. So Brahmaviharas can be helpful. Brahmaviharas are usually antidotes for ill will, but ill will and fear can be very closely linked. So practicing self-metta, especially to feel better about oneself, can be very helpful, because obviously if we practice metta, that will lead to a lot of positive emotions towards ourselves. And then normally the fear cannot really coexist with all the positive emotions, and it will at least get lessened. If we are really good at practicing metta, even the fear might even dissolve completely. So Brahmaviharas can also be a very good method. And Dave says, is sensual pleasure inherently disturbing, or is it attachment that is the disturbing part? Is an enlightened being disturbed by pleasure? So an enlightened being is not disturbed by pleasure, because an enlightened being has no more attachment. So sensual pleasures usually agitate the mind, because we have an attraction to them, and they draw the mind out towards the object, doesn't let the mind rest in the inner peace. So you can say attachment is the real problem, but as long as we haven't fully overcome all sensual desire in our mind, then sensual pleasure immediately leads to attachment. So this is almost basically the same thing. It's like basically one thing immediately leads to the other thing. So indulging in sensual pleasure kind of feeds this hindrance of sensual desire, and if we are feeding into this hindrance, then obviously our mind gets more agitated and gets further away from this inner state of peace. So for that reason, you can say sensual pleasures are inherently disturbing as long as we have sensual desire in our mind. So Chandni asks, Aya, what if you are a primary caregiver and your family member is alive only depending on your efforts, for example, feeding, bathing, and they can't even express themselves if they are thirsty for water? How does one let it go and let the body take its course of decomposition when it isn't your body? And she says that her father has late-stage dementia. So when we practice this form of meditation, especially in a case like this, it is important not to practice this form exclusively. In a case like this, it might be actually more helpful to practice Brahmaviharas, loving kindness and compassion towards that father, and or general towards everybody in the situation, but especially towards the father and towards yourself, instead of focusing on the sign of the repulsive. Because obviously when we are practicing this meditation doesn't mean that we start neglecting others and start to think, oh, it doesn't matter if they die, so I just don't care about others anymore. So obviously we're still living in the world, we're still having our social relationships, we're still having the responsibilities that we have. So whether that is looking after a baby or looking after an elderly relative or looking after patients, anybody who needs our help, doesn't mean that we become careless and uncompassionate towards them and think, oh, it's just a random body, so if they die, just let them die. Obviously, in that case, it's much more appropriate to practice compassion and loving kindness and these kind of things, and to practice the repulsiveness mostly towards our own body, because what we want to break is our attachment towards our own body. We don't want to start hating other people or developing ill will towards other people. And then Buddha Ruchi says, I think a benefit of contemplating death is the universality of it. As we fear our own death, we know that all beings, friends, family, everyone around us suffers with the fear of death. So that is also one important thing, that we just become a lot more compassionate. We see other people also have fear of death, so we kind of understand where they're coming from. Sometimes out of fear, people do a lot of stupid things. People can hurt each other. So as we develop wisdom and as we see that, everybody is just afraid and trying to protect themselves, we kind of become more tolerant of other people. And if they are behaving in slightly unpleasant ways, for example, out of fear. So fear can make people do really stupid stuff. And if we have the wisdom to see where they're coming from and what their motivation is, sometimes it's much easier to be tolerant and to just practice compassion. So as we can see, this is also very closely interlinked. As we practice these kind of meditations, also Brahmaviharas can become stronger. Like, for example, compassion can become a lot stronger. Loving kindness can become a lot stronger as a byproduct of these kind of meditations that we have been talking about today. So I think that was the last question for today. And also the time is up already. I'm glad there was so much discussion, and I'm glad there was so much interest in this topic. And I'm glad that people were still listening and didn't all tune out. Because talking about repulsiveness obviously can be quite challenging. But for now, we can finish with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So I wish you all a good rest of the day and a good week. And I will see you all next Tuesday.